Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's video is going to be my July wrap-up. This is actually my second time filming this intro because I got through the entire intro, my statistics for the month, and was starting to talk about the first book when I realized I was referring to this as my August wrap-up. August is the month we're currently in, not the month that I'm wrapping up, so doing this whole intro again because I don't know what I'm talking about apparently. In the month of July, because that's the month I'm talking about, I read 6 books and I also DNF'd 2. Yeah, I do not DNF all that often, and this month I DNF'd 2 books. We will discuss it all, of course. So in the month of July, I read a total of 2,331 pages. That is not including the DNFs. And my average star rating was 3.83 out of 5. So we have a lot of books to talk about today. Let's just dive in with the first book that I read in the month of July. You know, the month that just happened, not the month that's currently going on, because that month's not over yet. So the first book I read in July was my Read Christie pick for that month, Evil Under the Sun. I gave this book 4 stars. This was actually a reread for me. I read this book several years ago, but the thing is, I knew that I had liked it, but I really didn't remember much of anything about the book, so I wanted to reread it because at some point I'm planning to make a YouTube video ranking all the Agatha Christie books that I've read so far, and obviously you can't rank a book you don't remember. In this book, Poirot goes on vacation to a British seaside resort, but of course where Poirot goes, murder follows. One of the hotel's guests, a vixen named Arlena Stewart, is found dead, and it turns out that everyone on this island, including Arlena's own husband, seems to have a reason to have potentially wanted her dead. It's up to Poirot to find the killer. As I started reading this book, parts of it did sort of start to come back to me as I was reading, but there were still parts that I did not entirely have figured out, even though this was a reread, so that was great. I do think the way that the murder is done in this book is written really well, and I think it's very complex, intricately plotted. Possibly a bit far-fetched, like if you were actually going to commit a murder in real life. A lot of work goes into this one, but in terms of a reading experience, it's great. I didn't give it a 5 because it's not like, it didn't totally just punch me in the face in terms of surprises. It's not like an all-time favorite, but I think when I film that ranking Agatha Christie video, this one's going to be fairly high up there. The next book I read was The Secrets of Hartwood Hall by Katie Lumsden. Katie is a booktuber and I really enjoy her videos, so when I found out that she wrote a book and it sounded really good, I knew I had to read it. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I did enjoy it overall. The Secrets of Hartwood Hall is a Gothic Victorian historical fiction that really takes a lot of inspiration from the works of the Bronte sisters. Our main character, Margaret, has recently been widowed and she accepts a job as a governess at the mysterious Hartwood Hall. When she arrives, she takes to her young charge, Louis, and develops a bit of an attraction to the handsome gardener, but she begins to suspect that her new mistress is keeping some sort of secret, and that something secretive is going on at Hartwood Hall. All in all, I did really like this book. You know, I think it was well written, and I definitely would read another book from Katie if she decides to write another one. It also definitely delivers that sort of Gothic, Bronte-esque atmosphere, so if that's something you like, I definitely think you should check this book out. There were several instances where I was able to predict where the book was going, but there were some parts that just took me off guard, so I really enjoyed that as well. I can definitely see the works of classic literature that inspired Katie to write this book. Obviously, can't give too much away because it would be a spoiler, but if you're someone who really loves Victorian literature and the Brontes as much as Katie does, I think you will have an appreciation for this book. My biggest problem with this book is the romantic storyline. So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that there is a romantic attraction going on between Margaret and the gardener Paul. It's literally in the plot blurb. But to speak in vague terms, I think Margaret treats him horribly, and he really deserved better. She is so inconsiderate of his feelings in the end of the book. Granted, I listened to Katie's spoilery Q&A about this book after I finished reading it on her channel, and based on what she said in that video, I think that was her intention. Like, she did not intend for the reader to leave the book thinking Margaret handled the situation perfectly, but I still have a problem with it because the way Margaret treats Paul in the end made me not like Margaret as a character, because I think she just treats him in a very selfish manner, and it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth regarding her, which is not how you want to feel about the main character in a book. All in all, I did really enjoy this story, but I just did not like the way that was handled, and it made it hard for me to be happy for Margaret in the end, because it just gave me negative feelings about her as a person. Alright, now it's time to talk about my first DNF. So, in July of last year, I filmed a "These Books Will Self-Destruct in 12 Months" video, which means I had to read all of the books in that video by the end of July or unhaul them. So, I had this idea where I could make a vlog including one of my self-destruct books. And that book, A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro, the first Charlotte Holmes mystery. I ended up DNFing this after somewhere around 100 to 150 pages, and then I never ended up making that vlog because I just could not force myself to finish this book, I'm sorry to say. This is a Sherlock Holmes inspired young adult mystery. I think I bought this book back in 2018 when I was still a little bit more into reading young adult. It's not really my thing now. So the main characters in this book are Charlotte Holmes and Jamie Watson, who are the descendants of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, who in this universe were real people who actually existed. When a murder takes place at their boarding school, Charlotte and Jamie end up working together to figure out who the killer is. Because this is inspired by Sherlock Holmes, I was going to pair it with another book for that reading vlog, and that's the book that I will be talking about next in this video. I couldn't do this. I really knew almost instantly that I was not going to like it. I felt like the beginning was extremely info dumpy, and I did not like Charlotte as a character at all. She gave me such strong, not like the other girls vibes, and I couldn't stand it. That's like one of my least favorite things in fiction, is when you get this girl who like, oh, she's so smart, she's so amazing, she's not like these other girls who like girly things and stuff, you know? And I'm like, why do you have to put down other women to lift your female character up? Like, it's just, I can't. Like, the first time we meet Charlotte on page 8, she had on slim navy pants instead of the pleated skirt most of the girls wore. Her white Oxford shirt was buttoned up to her neck, and her ribbon tie looked as if it had been steamed. I was close enough to tell that she smelled like soap, not perfume, and that her face was as bare as if she just washed it. And immediately I was like, oh no. Like, oh, of course, our strong female character cannot wear a skirt or perfume or makeup, because that's for girly girls, and she's not like them. Also, you know, she buttons up her shirt because she doesn't show any of that scandalous cleavage. Like, honestly, like, immediately it was a red flag. It was a red flag, and I just felt like Charlotte as a character was not a good character. You know, she didn't feel like a real person to me, and There's like a reference to, oh my god, she helped Scotland Yard with a case when she was 12. I'm like, when she was 12? Really? It was just unbelievable, and she did not feel like a real person. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand it. I'm sorry, I'm getting mad just talking about it, but I could not force myself to read this book. I gave up. I'm sorry if you love this book. It was not for me. It was not for me. I couldn't do it to myself, y'all. I'm sorry. Anyways, on to more pleasant subjects. I did still read the book I was planning to pair with A Study in Charlotte in that vlog that never was. And that book was A Study in Scarlet Women by Sherry Thomas. This is the first Lady Sherlock mystery. So this book also features a Sherlock Holmes, and that's why I was going to pair the two of them together in a vlog. This book is basically a reimagining of what if Sherlock Holmes was a woman, and it follows Charlotte Holmes as she leaves home and tries to establish herself as a private detective in Victorian London. She uses the alias Sherlock Holmes to get clients without exposing herself as a woman. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I was leaning more towards a 4, but the ending was not my personal favorite. First, I'll say the things that I liked about this book. I did really like some of the characters. I think my favorite was the Watson character. I loved her. And I also quite enjoyed the Inspector character and his relationship with his wife. I thought the two of them had a very cute dynamic, so I enjoyed that as well. I also like that Charlotte Holmes, contrary to how she looks on the book cover, is described as being more so full-figured, and she has, let's say, a very healthy appetite, which, relatable, you know? Like, I also just love eating, and I will devour the stuff that's in front of me. So I thought that was a very endearing character trait, and I don't know, I just really liked that about her, because so many times in books, like, you get characters and they're like, oh, so-and-so was so upset, they couldn't even eat, and I'm like, girl, I have never been so upset in my life that I could not eat. Like, I can eat any time of day, you know, if the food looks good enough. I'll make room. So I kind of liked that, you know, she was like more so of a plus-sized main character, and I just found her like ability to polish off a plate of pastries like relatable. Me too, girl. There was a bit of a romantic plotline introduced in this book, and I'm not entirely sure about it yet. I do love a good slow burn, like childhood friends to lovers. However, I'm not sure how the author is going to go about this, because there's sort of a big impediment in the way of the two of them being together. And I don't know how she's going to potentially get around that, so we'll see how it develops in future books. Now, on to the things about this book that I did not like. First, I think sometimes the author gives you too much information. Like, she'll go into backstory and name drop a lot of people who don't even appear in the book. And so I think it was very confusing, because if you're dropping all of these names that are not relevant, it makes it very confusing for me as the reader to know like which characters I need to remember and who I don't. Like, I do not need to know the name of the inspector's brother-in-law or this woman who was mean to Charlotte one time if they're never going to appear in the book. Like, you don't need to give them a name, because then you're just throwing all of these names at me, and it makes it very hard to follow. So that made it very confusing. It was hard for me to realize like who was actually relevant to the story and who was not. I also did not love the reveal of the murderer in this book, so I'm not going to go into specifics, but you might consider this a spoiler, so just skip to the next book if you don't want to hear anything. But the person who is the murderer in this book does not appear until well over page 200. So there's absolutely no way you can read this book and figure out who the murderer is. And I didn't like that, because my personal preference, I like it when the author gives you all the information you need to solve the mystery. You know, obviously in a perfect world, I want them to give me all the information, but conceal it so well that I can't figure it out. But in hindsight, I can look back and be like, oh my God, of course, like it was right there staring me in the face this whole time. In a perfect world, that's what I want out of a mystery. And even if I am able to guess, you know, I want to be able to feel like, okay, here were all the clues that I picked up on. Well done, author. And the fact that it was physically impossible for me to guess the murderer before page 200 and something, that really bothered me, because it's impossible to figure it out, and I want to be able to figure it out. And I want to know, okay, here's all the foreshadowing that the author laid out. And in this book, that just cannot happen, because you don't meet the murderer until the book is almost over. So that's the reason I ended up giving it a 3.5 instead of a 4. I will keep reading this series to see how it develops. I just hope in other mysteries the murderer actually appears before the 3rd act, because that really bothered me. And I finally finished reading The Toll by Neil Shusterman, the 3rd book in the Archivist trilogy. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars as well. This series takes place in a futuristic world where mankind has successfully eradicated death. Because of that, these people are ordained as scythes to keep the population under control, and basically every scythe is responsible for systematically murdering a certain percentage of the world's population every single year. This was my least favorite book in the trilogy, and I think it's just because there was so much going on. There were so many different characters who were narrating chapters, and so I felt like once I finally got into a storyline, then we would switch to somebody else, and it was just hard for me to fully immerse myself in the book because we were changing perspectives so frequently. I felt like the book was at times a little slow, and the two main characters like barely see each other in the entire book, which was not my favorite. There were still some plot lines in the book that I really quite enjoyed, though. I really grew to really enjoy Grayson as a character in this book, and I really liked some of his scenes that we saw in this. Also, the end, the part with the final scene with Scythe Faraday, that like almost moved me to tears. So, you know, I didn't pick up these young adult dystopian books expecting to cry, but I almost did on several occasions. So Neil Shusterman deserves props for that. And I would really love to see these books be adapted for a film or TV show. I think they have a great cinematic quality and could definitely be a blockbuster film franchise. Someone in Hollywood get on that. Now it's time for my other DNF, and it was another one of my self-destruct books. It was the one you all picked for me to read, Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. Yeah, I DNF'd this around page like 70-ish, I think. This is a young adult fantasy that takes place in a Viking-inspired world, and our main character, whose name escapes me at the moment, she believed that her brother died in battle several years ago, but then one day she sees him across the battlefield fighting with their enemy. The reason I decided to DNF this is I just wasn't connecting with any of the characters. This book begins with that battle that I just mentioned where she sees her brother, and it sounds like it should be really interesting and exciting. Like, yes, let's start the book off with a big battle. But I personally didn't like that because none of the characters meant anything to me, and I think if you're going to have a big battle sequence, I need to care about the characters because there's no stakes otherwise. Like, I think when you're reading a battle sequence, you should be on the edge of your seat, worried, like, is this character that I love going to die? Are they going to be okay? But if the characters don't mean anything to you, there's not that sense of stakes, so it just feels kind of hollow. by the time I finally DNF'd this, I still didn't feel like I connected with any of the characters in any significant way, and so that's why I decided to DNF it. I just didn't feel that personal investment that I needed to keep going. So yeah, this was my second DNF of the month. I am sorry to everyone who voted for me to read this book. Sorry I couldn't love it for you guys. Then I read Who is Maud Dixon by Alexandra Andrews. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. This is, I would say, sort of a literary fiction and mystery hybrid. It follows a main character named Florence who, after leaving her job in publishing, receives the opportunity to become a personal assistant to the mysterious author Maud Dixon. So Maud Dixon is an extremely famous author of a successful book, but Maud Dixon is a pseudonym. She doesn't do any appearances, and no one knows who Maud Dixon actually is. So when Florence receives this opportunity to go work for Maud and figure out her true identity, she jumps at the chance. Before I read this book, I was told not to read the plot summary on Goodreads because it gives a bit too much away, so I encourage you to just go into this book not knowing much if you're going to read it. All in all, I did like it. I do think the beginning was extremely slow because we have to go through like 50 pages setting up Florence's job at the publishing house and what's going on with her before Maud actually comes into the picture. So I do think the beginning was a bit boring, and I feel like a lot of it could have just been cut out. But this book was entertaining, and it was batshit insane in the end. But I kind of liked it. Like, it was crazy, it was a bit unrealistic and convoluted, but I had fun, you know? So it was ridiculous, but it was a fun ridiculous. And finally, I read The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, which I also gave 4 stars. This is a Victorian classic novel that is widely considered to be the first example of the country house mystery. It involves this group of people who are all attending a birthday party, and the titular Moonstone, a very expensive jewel of Indian origin, disappears from the party. So who took it, and where is the Moonstone now? Even though Wilkie Collins is a Victorian author, I feel like his writing style is not too dense, and all in all, it is pretty easy to understand. It's not like, you know, some classic novelists where they just have these super long sentences with like 17 commas and you need to reread them 3 times to understand what they're talking about. I feel like his writing style is pretty accessible. I also read The Woman in White by him. I think I preferred that one to The Moonstone, but both were really good. If there are any Wilkie Collins fans out there, let me know. Are there any other books of his that are worth my time? I would be open to reading from him again. All in all, the book was enjoyable, and when we found out who physically took the Moonstone, I was surprised. Now, I do want to say, like I mentioned, the Moonstone is an Indian jewel, and we find out in the very beginning that a member of this wealthy British family, he stole the jewel while he was fighting for the British in India, and there is a plot element in this book of where it's talking about this group of Indian men who travel to England wanting to reclaim the Moonstone and take it back. So colonialism is sort of a theme in this book, and I don't know what Wilkie Collins's beliefs about colonialism were. Based on this book, I think he was against it, and sort of against this idea of, you know, white people going to someone else's country and taking things that weren't theirs. But I do think sometimes the way he describes the Indians does come across as racist, like with the descriptions of how they look. So I feel like, you know, for a Victorian person living in this time period, he was more forward thinking, but obviously still susceptible to the biases of that time. I don't know. That was just my interpretation. I would be interested in doing some more research about his thoughts on the whole issue. That's just how I interpreted the book. So those are the books that I read in the month of July 2023. Have you read any of the books that I read this month? If so, do let me know what you thought of them in the comments section. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a marvelous rest of your day. Bye, and I'll see you next time.